Hi, I'm Dana from vipHomeLink. Welcome to the VIP Home Story Beats. Today, we are interviewing somebody from Orkin. Can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, hello. My name's Ian Williams. I'm a technical services manager for Orkin, and excited to be here with you all today.
Thanks for coming. So we're going to get started here. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started saving lots and lots of homeowners that have pest problems. I know probably almost every home has an issue, right?
Yeah. Lots of homes do, and if they don't, they probably will, is one of the ways we look at it. But yeah, I got my starts in the industry back in 2009. I had a biology degree, moved to Atlanta, was looking for a job, actually saw a truck belonging to a sister company of Orkin in the Atlanta traffic. And I said, you know what, I could probably do something like this. A couple weeks later, started there and have been there ever since. So it's been really awesome to move across a couple different companies and be with Orkin in the Orkin family, and really get to help not only our customers, but now I deal a lot with my customers who are our technicians and our managers to really make sure that they know how to help our customers in the field and make sure that we're providing excellent customer service and being able to help them with their pest problem.
Right. So question, where do bees, we're going to talk a lot about bees today. So
Yeah.
Where do bees typically nest? In the home, in the yard? Is it equal? What do you see the most of?
Yeah. So when we're talking about bees, first off, there are thousands of species of bees native to the US. But oftentimes when we're talking about bees around the home, we're probably talking about honeybees, bumblebees, carpenter bees, maybe a couple other species of bees. If we're talking about honeybees, a lot of times if they're around the home, they're going to be nesting in voids. And so in nature, you see that as like a log. And maybe you've seen National Geographic, the bear trying to get into the log to get at the bees. But if we're having them around the home, oftentimes they've decided that a wall void or your attic space or that shed that you don't use that often, that's kind of where we're like, hey, this is a cool place. This is protected. I'm gonna start to make a hive here. When we're dealing with carpenter bees, many folks experience those around the edge of their homes, right behind their gutters. That fascia board is often a great place for them to nest, and so they might drill a little hole and spit out some stuff on the side of your house, and it doesn't look that great.
Hole drillers.
Yeah. And if we're out in the yard, then that's where we're probably dealing with like bumblebees. They're going to nest in the ground most often, and they might be in the yard for you.
Okay, very interesting. So you're talking about the yard. We actually had an experience at our house. We were seeing lots of bees flying around, but they were, going up. We thought maybe they were in the gutters somewhere. We couldn't really locate it until one day there was a swarm. They actually, I don't know what type of bee, but went underneath the wood chips, and it was huge nest. I mean,
gotcha.
We had somebody come out, and I think there were 2 to 3 treatments until it was completely gone. When you see such a big nest, underground, whether it's in the wood chips or somewhere else, is that typical?
It can be. It's typically not typical for bees. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about like wasps and yellow jackets at some point, but that's more typical of like a yellow jacket nesting in the ground, where you're getting, potentially thousands of yellow jackets that are living in an excavated cavity on the ground. Yeah, they can be tough to get rid of.
Are bees dangerous? Are all bees dangerous? Are they all stinging? Typically, do they stay away from people and they want to just go to the flowers and other things?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, when we're talking about bees, generally speaking, most of them, most of the species we're never going to interact with in a negative way. But we were talking about those ones that are right around the house. They can be dangerous in so much as that, honeybees, carpenter bees to some extent, and bumblebees can sting.
Right.
And that's where the danger comes from. If you're a healthy adult that doesn't have an allergy, you're probably going to be okay. You're not going to be happy, but
Right.
you're probably going to be okay. But certainly if you or part of your family, or you've got small children or pets, and if there's a bee allergy involved, then it can become a very different situation. And so you've got to pay a lot of attention to that. So in terms of a danger to humans and pets, I like to think about it as we want to respect them. We want to keep our distance from them.
Mhm.
But, most of the time, if we're just out in the yard and there's flowers and there's bees around, they're happy, we're happy. Unless you accidentally squish them or step on them, they're not there to bother you.
Right.
It becomes an issue if they're nesting around your house and you get too close to their nest and they say, hey, this might be a threat. And then that's where it gets tricky.
The back off.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Can bees damage your home?
Yeah, it's a great question. When we talked about carpenter bees, oftentimes we can see that damage. They've drilled a little hole. They've put excrements and pollen bits and things on the side of your home. So that can kind of damage your paint and things. But what I always like to tell homeowners is even if you don't mind the holes, or you don't mind the little bit of stuff on the side of your house, you will probably mind if a woodpecker figures out that there are carpenter bees there, because what they're doing is they're nesting in that cavity. They're laying larvae, and that larva is there for months or sometimes weeks in the summer. But a woodpecker will say, hey, this is awesome, but they're going to make a brand new, much larger hole to get that.
It's like an introduction for them.
Yeah. And so they can do pretty significant damage, some of the larger woodpeckers especially. In terms of the actual bees, when we talk about honeybees, they can be a pretty big nuisance if they show up and nest inside of a wall void. You get a honeybee hive in there, they're going to make honey and honeycomb inside that wall. And we've had to remove where you've got tens and sometimes a couple 100 pounds of nesting material and honey that's inside of a wall. And it's not as much of a problem while the bees are actually there. The bees are maintaining it. They're maintaining the honey. They're maintaining the structure of it. But if the bees are gone for any reason, they decide to leave, they have a disease issue or something like that. Now you're going to deal with all of that honey mass in the wall, and the bees aren't there to protect it. So
there's nowhere to go.
So it's as the nest degrades, you have the honey start to ferment. You're going to be attracting a lot of other pests. You could potentially have like mold issues. So anytime you've got honeybees nesting in a wall, that part of the process, that we always follow is when we're dealing with that is a lot of times excavating that out of the wall void, cleaning that area really good to protect it, and also to remove a lot of that material so that you limit the honeybees trying to find that same space again, because they say, hey, bees have been here before, why not try this again?
So is there anything homeowners can do to prevent those bees coming in? Like, is there something that can go on the outside as a protectant or anything like that?
Yeah. So when we think about integrated pest management and how we try to approach pest control at Orkin, the easiest thing is if I'm looking at the outside of the house and I can see openings that a bee could get into, how can I seal those up? So this time of year, as we're coming through winter and hopefully getting into some warmth with spring,
at some point.
You've had that freeze thaw cycle go in a lot of parts of the country. And so, the sealants that are around your windows and doors, or the old mortar on your brick, as those start to degrade and open up spaces for a bee to be able to fly in and get into a wall void, that's where we want to start saying, hey, like, what can I do to seal that up? Reseal those windows and doors. If you've got gaps in your brick, like reseal that, fresh paint, all those things that a lot of times we say, I'll get to it eventually. Those are things that'll make a direct impact on whether or not, bees decide to show up.
Are there certain times of the year where bees nest where they're more active than others? Is it the beginning of spring, summer, fall?
It depends a little bit on the species we're dealing with. So as we get into the first couple weeks of spring, a lot of folks may start experiencing carpenter bees at their home because they've
Right.
been overwintering and they're saying, hey, like the pollen's finally here. It's time to get going. And they're going to go out like gangbusters, and you start to see this huge mass
Like
of
it's like a
carpenter
mass.
bees.
Yeah.
Yeah. They show up at the house, and you've got males flying around everywhere, and they're the ones that are real territorial and are flying
Okay,
in your face
interesting.
and that kind of stuff. But fun bee fact, none of the males have stingers. So the carpenter bee males, while they're aggressive, they're not going to do anything to you.
You just see people's hands flailing, right?
Yeah,
All over,
yeah.
all over the place. As my
Yeah.
sister likes to say, it's every man for themselves, right?
Yes, yes.
Get out.
So, yes, absolutely. So carpenter bees, we see them kind of at the beginning of spring in numbers. And then as you start to get through into spring a little bit, that's where you might start seeing like honeybee swarms. That's the time of year where they will often swarm. And so that's pretty alarming when you see, several thousand bees, in an area.
Right.
So that's something to pay attention to and be aware of. But then really when we get into the later parts of the year, late summer into early autumn, we don't deal with it so much with bees, but then that's when, a lot of the wasps start to become challenges in managing them. So that's kind of the seasonality that we run into.
So what are killer bees? And are they aggressive towards humans? Do you see them all over?
Those are great questions. So when we talk about killer bees, we're talking about an Africanized honeybee. And so that's a hybrid subspecies of the European honeybee that was accidentally was created and accidentally released in Brazil in the 1950s.
Okay.
And does really well in tropical climates. So it has spread through almost all of Latin America and made its way into the southern United States. So we definitely have them in almost all of the southern states. And they will continue to move north to some extent, but they don't do as well in a temperate climate as our European honeybees.
Right.
But yes, as their name implies, by killer bees, they are significantly more aggressive. And that is something, if you're a homeowner in an area that does have Africanized bees established, you want to be really careful. Your European honeybees are pretty docile. They've been bred to be pretty docile, as much as we keep them as for honey production.
Right.
But the Africanized bees are much more aggressive. They're much more aggressive further away from their nest, and they're much more persistent once they become aggressive. So that's definitely a situation that, hey, if I'm in an area and I've got honeybees and I'm not sure if they're Africanized or not, just call a professional, call Orkin. We'll be happy to come up with a management plan for you.
What's the best way to keep bees away from you? If you're enjoying a nice summer night or spring night, like even going into fall in September, I know by us in Chicago, the bees are crazy. I mean, you can't go outside with food. You try to, detract them. And are there candles? What do you recommend that people use in their yards to ward off the bees, wasps, all of the above?
All of the above, absolutely. So yeah, if we're talking bees, they're typically after, floral, sweet, they're plant feeders. They're going after nectar. So if you've got really sweet drinks or a lot of sugary substances out and about, I know we have a lot of commercial customers that have, maybe an outdoor bar or an outdoor slushy stand or something like that. And they have a big challenge with bees because they're attracted to those sweets. They want to keep coming and saying, hey, this is sweet. I want to go after it. So if you're enjoying a sweet drink, that kind of thing, it's something to be mindful of. But if it's just, hey, I occasionally have one in my backyard on my patio or having a barbecue, honeybees typically aren't the challenge. It's more so like yellow jackets. And so they're the typical ones that, you get into that July, August, September barbecue time. And they're protein feeders. You're about to throw the hot dogs or hamburgers on the grill, and they're there. They're saying, hey, this is meat. I want to try and get some of this. A lot of times it's really challenging in a backyard environment to address that, because that's late in the season where you've got, large nests. Most of what we're talking about any of these species of bees and wasps are typically annual. So they're started in the spring by one queen, and then they're going throughout the year to try and finish out the year. We get our honeybees and different things, they kind of go throughout. But so that time of year, you've got the biggest number of foraging adults that are out there to try and make sure that they can find what they want. So for a homeowner, calling a professional as soon as you start to say, hey, if it's June or July and you're seeing yellow jackets, you're going to continue to see those throughout the year.
Right.
So call a professional, have them do an assessment of your yard and your property, see, hey, is there a nest on the property that we could deal with now before it gets even larger and harder to deal with. There are some commercially available traps and things like that exist. And my only thing that I tell customers is if they are going to use those, put them away from where they want to be.
Right.
So if I've got an area where I want to grill and have a patio and I want to try and employ a yellow jacket trap, put the yellow jacket trap in the other end of your yard, the opposite corner, to try and draw them to that, because they'll be attracted to that. You don't want to put it right next to your grill.
No, and have everybody hanging out. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So as we're talking about bees and wasps and hornets, what's the biggest difference with them? And do they all nest kind of in the same locations? And do we need to be more fearful of one than another, or are they kind of all in the same category?
Yeah. So some of the biggest differences are kind of their food preferences. So our bees are almost all pollen feeders. So they're going after nectar and flowers, or pollen and flowers, and they're consuming that. So they're wonderful pollinators. They're going after all these different flowers and things. We talk about wasps, most of them are predatory or parasites. And so, like your yellow jackets, for instance, they're going to go after, decaying organic matter if something's, dead in the backyard in the bushes, or they'll eat other insects. They'll go after caterpillars, different things. And some of them are super specialized to focus on, one caterpillar. They'll go find that one species of caterpillar and go after that. But that's kind of the biggest differences in them. Within those groups, you get into your solitary bees or wasps, and they're almost always really docile, because, from a protect the nest perspective, they'd rather live to fight another day rather than go down today.
Right.
You start to talk about your social bees and wasps, your honeybees, your yellow jackets, some of your hornets, that kind of stuff. That's where they have the ability to be much more aggressive, because they're not the queen. They're just a worker, and their whole purpose is, build the nest, protect the nest. So that's where they can be a lot more aggressive. The other thing to take into account in there too is, with the exception of the Africanized honeybees, your European honeybee is pretty docile, for one, because it's got a different type of stinger. It's got a barbed stinger. So one honeybee can only sting you one time, and it'll actually die if it stings you, because its stinger stays in you. And so it kind of gets pulled apart when you flick it off or whatever. But when you're dealing with wasps and hornets and most other bees, they can sting you as many times as they want. And so if I'm categorizing things in fearful, or like I just like to say respective, how respectful am I being towards these? Yellow jackets are the ones that I want to be most respectful of, because they're small, they can all sting me a bunch, and they can have huge numbers. And so that's where my biggest wariness comes from when I deal with any of these stinging insects.
Can only imagine, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about killer bees. What about the murder hornets?
Yes. So we're talking about the Asian giant hornet, right? And so with that, I know there's been a lot of media attention on them, and they get called the murder hornets. They're introduced accidentally from Japan, and have only been found in Washington State. So if you're in that part of the country, something to be aware of.
Beware.
I wouldn't be terrified of. They do have a more potent sting than the hornets we have here. And so if you do get stung, it is something to be, aware of. Again, a healthy adult without an allergy is probably not going to be an issue. When you get into, do you have an allergy, or are you, small or unable to escape if you were to come across a nest? That's a concern. The only other concern to have is if you're in that area where, again, state and federal officials are trying very hard to eradicate that. And so hopefully it's a non-issue for us in the near future. But honeybee farmers. And so whether you're a commercial or a hobbyist honeybee farm in those areas, the Japanese giant hornet actually goes after those honeybees and will attack them and can actually decimate a honeybee hive and, scavenge the young and eat the honey and all kinds of stuff. So it's
kind of fascinating, actually.
Yeah. 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 It's really interesting to think about them kind of going after each other like that, but they're different species. And so they're out there trying to take care of themselves.
Protect their own and take care of them. So we have this segment at our company called Homeowner Horror Stories. Do you have any horror stories of either of your own or of clients that you can share with us?
Yeah. So I've dealt with a multitude on my own, but one of the ones that I think really kind of drives home some of the points we're making here is one that I got from a customer. So customer had a son in his bedroom, and he's got a tennis ball, and he's bouncing it on the wall. Like, you might just throwing, catching kind of thing. And you're like, okay, no big deal. Well, we've been talking about, different species, and we're going towards the ones I want to be most respectful of, yellow jackets. So unbeknownst to the son, there was yellow jackets who had nested in the wall void on the same wall. And so they're on the back side of the wall. And what happens is when they get in there, when yellow jackets, encounter the different materials, they want to say, hey, can I expand this area? And so when they hit the sheetrock from the inside of the wall void, they actually chew away the sheetrock. So now the wall isn't actually there. It's just a thin layer of paint and a thin layer of the paper nesting material from the nest. So the poor son throws the tennis ball, and it just goes right through the wall into this yellow jacket nest.
Right.
So tennis ball's gone. Angry yellow jackets are now there. And so the mom, hears the commotion, runs in, gets the son out, and they have to shut the door, stuff a towel under the door to prevent yellow jackets from getting into the rest of the house.
Can't they go in the vents?
Potentially, but that's not as much of a. They're not gonna try and search out through that way. But it's tough to think about, with those kind of situations. It's so easy to be surprised. Nobody's thinking, oh, I'm going to have to deal with yellow jackets flying out of my wall today. But that's what happens, sometimes when they're left to nest in some of those areas. So that's where it becomes a problem.
So then when they call Orkin and you guys show up, how are you mitigating that situation? Because you obviously have to go in that room and risk, some obviously getting out of the room into the rest of the home, and just making sure that you've, cleaned up everything that you can. Could it recur again in the same spot? What if one is left? How can you?
Yeah. So really great question. So when we come out, it's going to be custom to every kind of situation, but having the right tools and equipment. So having something like a bee suit will protect us against the vast majority of the bees and wasps we've been talking about today, and having products to kind of control some of those issues. But in the case of like the yellow jackets, depending on how high up it is from the ground, we could potentially deal with it from the exterior of the home to get the situation under control before we go back on the inside. But yeah, just like you said, making sure then we say, hey, we've got this problem. How do we stop this from coming back? So removing any of the nesting material that's in the wall void, cleaning that area to make sure that we're eliminating a lot of the scents and pheromones that, hey, this has been used before. And then really looking to say on the exterior, how did they get in? How can we seal that so that this doesn't happen again?
Right. Okay. Well, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would like to bring up?
Yeah. So I really just want to reiterate, the vast majority of the thousands of species of bees and wasps that we deal with or that exist in the US, are beneficial, really amazing pollinators, do a really great job on the wasp side of, going after a lot of other pest insect species.
Right.
And so generally, even the ones that we're talking about as the yellow jackets and things that are doing harm and damage, they're only an issue when they're right around your house, right? If you've got somebody that's got an allergy, or you're in a high traffic area, a bald-faced hornet nest in a tree 60 feet off the ground in your backyard is different than on, the eave of your house right above your garage.
Right.
And handling those is different. So looking for a custom solution to keep our customers safe, to keep our customers' property intact, that's really what we're about. And the other thing I didn't mention earlier, but if you are a homeowner and you do get into a situation where you're dealing with these stinging insects and you get stung, if you're around a nest, you need to leave that area immediately. They've just also tagged you, with a pheromone that says to all the other workers, hey, there's a threat to the nest.
Right.
Yeah, and you are that threat. And so it doesn't get better if you hang out in that area. So, and I'm sure all too many homeowners know the sting of having dealt with these before. So just be careful out there. And if you have any questions, call a professional, call Orkin.
Call Orkin.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming today. And we look forward to our next visit with you guys and for further podcasts that we can bring you back on.
Absolutely. It was such a pleasure to talk with you today. And if you have any questions, feel free to give us a call.
Absolutely. Take care. Have a great one.
Thanks. You too.
All right. Bye.